member for Flinders will have the opportunity to end the debate at a later point. The Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, what we just heard was a speech without flair or substance. A speech by the Leader of the Opposition,
the member for Flinders.
speaking to his own people, and not even successfully, because there was no enthusiasm in the opposition for this motion. None. I mean, you're sitting up there po-faced right through it. And the fact is, Mr Speaker, that the Leader of the Opposition shows all of the signs of a person having peaked and, in political terms, is in decline on his side of public life. That's the position. That was the position. And the speech, which was about essentially an attack on me, wasn't washing on the other side, because when he got down to it, what was the substance of it? He's basically hiding from the fact that he has a policy prescription which would reverse the economy's progress. Now, that's his great problem. And it may be sucking on a bitter pill for members opposite to know, but they do know that any policy which wants to contract public spending by 2 percentage points of gross domestic product, that cuts $7 billion out of the budget, that turns industrial peace into industrial mayhem, that puts a 15% goods and services tax on spending and therefore reduces demand, is going to do nothing whatsoever to engender a continuing recovery and to see unemployment abate. They know that on that side of the House, and he knows it. And they know they're now they're sort of beached. They've got a policy that's, in a sense, the tide is going out, and they can't keep up with it because their policy position is one which would basically reverse progress in the economy. Now, Mr Speaker, I don't know whether the Leader of the Opposition feels that he has any policy strength to his position when the principal policy organisations of the world are urging an expansionary fiscal stance by governments and an expansionary approach to policy, when he is arguing for the reverse. And it may be a sad matter for the opposition, but they are in a position now where they know their policy prescription is irrelevant to Australia's position. Worse, it would actually they would actually vandalise our position by seeking to push the economy back into recession from whence it came. He talked about, the Leader of the Opposition talked about 10 years hard labour. But he didn't furnish any results. He didn't talk about the fact that when he left us, he had 700,000 people out of work as the government's principal advisor, that there was 6 million only in the workforce, where today there's nearly 8 million. He didn't refer to any of the structural changes which he and his party lazily left behind after 30 years of office, which saw the economy closed, shut, without confidence and without options, unable to pay for its import, with its debt to GDP rising from about 11 or 12% to over 33% within 2 or 3 years of the Hawke government coming to office because of that structural weakness engendered by them. He didn't refer to any of those issues of dealing with the big microeconomic changes in the labour market, or whether it be the ports and wharves, or the telecommunication system, or the rail system, or the trunk road system, or any of the other hard rutted-in problems that have been left to the Labor Party. He referred to none of these things, believing that simply to relieve the tax on payroll tax and cut the price of petrol, we're asked to believe that a GST, which taxes everything from food and clothing to every service in the economy, which will relieve only the tax on payrolls and reduce the tax on petrol, is going to produce a revolution in the Australian economy. What foolish, simple person would believe that rubbish? What foolish, simple person would believe that rubbish? Arguing that a 10th-order tax change would make such a difference to the Australian economy, it would burst out of its skin and find itself as a productive place and a new place in the world. The fact is, Mr Speaker, that the Liberal Party is bereft of policy, as it always was. And to look different, the Leader of the Opposition embraced the consumption tax so he could argue to his front bench that he represented something, even though that something was an inappropriate something for Australia's economic conditions, even though it was an appropriate thing for its conditions. And the thing is, Mr Speaker, he says 10 years of excuses, when in fact the government has taken on every rutted-in problem that governments of 30 years standing had left behind. And my colleague, the Minister for Finance, this week talked about the changes which had taken place on the ports and wharves. The Minister for Employment and Industrial Relations yesterday was talking about industrial changes taking place in the state of Victoria. I was talking about, in the last couple of days, the enterprise agreements bringing flexibility to businesses across the country. We've got low inflation, we're in a productivity surge, a productivity bubble. We've made relationships in Asia we've never made before. We have ourselves a position in the world we could never have hoped to have under the opposition. We've led the world through the Cairns Group in fighting the Europeans on a decent, fair and open multilateral trading system, which they never had the wit to do. Doug Anthony would come back from discussions with the British and the Europeans saying, they basically turned me away. They basically turned me away. That was not our policy. We were into them, to try and get a decent multilateral trading system into place. Now, Mr Speaker, Australia is now poised, notwithstanding its current difficulties and the disappointment of high unemployment. Australia is now poised to take its place in the Asia-Pacific as never before, to take its place in the trading world as never before, to emerge as a competitive society. We've never perhaps been more competitive than we are at the moment via the exchange rate, wages and any other measures of competitiveness we were like. We were last as competitive when the exchange rate fell by 25 percentage points in the middle 1980s. The place is hugely competitive, and we are carving out a place for ourselves, and we are underpinning the strength of particularly sectors of the Australian economy that do well in this economy and to do well abroad. And while we've done that, Mr Speaker, we threaded together one of the most decent social security systems in the world. And we've done it with a tax to GDP, which is one of the smallest in the OECD, from one of the smallest public sectors in the world. We've turned a smaller public sector into a better public sector, a more compassionate public sector. We've got access and equity for health through Medicare, access and equity for kids through education and for adults as well, access and equity for aged people for aged care. We've got support for women in the workforce through childcare, all the things that you never had the wit or the compassion to put into place. And I noticed today this terribly pungent and offensive remark made by the Leader of the Opposition in his speech this morning. He said, "Giving people choice is the compassion that liberates. Just giving is the compassion that suffocates." Just giving is the compassion that suffocates. In other words, if you support somebody on a low income with support for their children through the family allowance supplement, it suffocates them. As I said yesterday, when I said, let's bring people up so that we don't have an underclass in Australia, you said it drags the rest of us down. It drags the rest of us down. In other words, if we try for a decent policy which gives Australians a part of the prosperity of this country, if we bring people up so that we move on as a society and as a group, you say it drags the people in the front back. It drags the rest of us down. If we give support to families with children through the family allowance supplement, you say just giving is the compassion which suffocates. If we give people support through Medicare, people who don't pay the Medicare levy because their incomes are too low but have families or may be unemployed, you say just giving, that is giving them health support without levy, is giving the compassion which suffocates. If we support someone who's unemployed through no fault of their own after 9 months, you say throw them off that support. We say keep them on and carry them along in society until we can retrain them and get them back to work. You say just giving is the compassion which suffocates. In other words, you say giving people choice is the compassion that liberates. In other words, throw them out after 9 months after unemployment benefits, knock off the support for taxpayers with children by the family allowance supplement, go and make kids from low-income families ask their parents to pay full fees in universities and elsewhere. That's the sort of choice which you say is the compassion which liberates, where in fact we know it's a pernicious choice that will only damage them and limit their opportunities in society, where the children of poor or low-income people, bright as they may be, won't get the opportunities to excel and to take their place in this economy which they're entitled to. And then, of course, you made the point, you half made the nasty point about the unemployment amongst young people, so talking about outer Western Melbourne or inner Melbourne of 56%, when in fact the proportion of unemployed young people amongst the age group 15 to 19 was 14%, not 56%. Those looking for work, 56%, but 14% of the kids 15 to 19. What do you want to do with kids 15 to 19? Break their heart? Break their spirit, telling them that they have no prospect for a job, when 14% only of the group is unemployed? The fact is, Mr Speaker, this heartless opposition not only has no head, it has no heart. Not only no head, no heart. It regards compassion as suffocating. It regards basically the policies of the fittest as the way forward. We just had an American election, the greatest show of democracy on earth, with 180 million people voting by their own free will, electing a democratic president on the basis of a policy of inclusion, of bringing people together, of not letting an underclass develop, of not letting people fall behind, of growing the American economy and society together, of joining together and sharing American prosperity. In all of that, you want to throw that to one side, that huge mandate, and go back to the dismal policies of Margaret Thatcher in the late 1970s and Ronald Reagan. If you give a tax cut, the wealthy will do so well. As they power along, the ordinary people will be sucked along in the vortex and they'll get something from it. In fact, they got sucked into unemployment and got nothing from it. And if you see in today's Financial Review, or was it the Sydney Morning Herald, a critical treatise on the lost years of Thatcher and what has emerged from it in Britain, from the same sort of policies, you don't have the wit to change and you offer us today. And then you talk about today about us being on the brink of a depression, and you quote me. But I'll tell you this, when I made that remark in 1985, we were powering along, growing the labour market hand over fist. The economy was growing again. There was no risk of my remark breaking the back of public confidence and pushing us back into a recession, as your remark today about a depression is calculated to do. Because basically you'll score off anybody to make your own way, because and now, Mr Speaker, he makes this plaintive plea to a basically unimpressed and disinterested backbench as he stands up and talks about his policies. And then I heard him say I should go out and understand people and meet people, like he did at the ball the other night for the Grand Prix in Adelaide, like he does up at Mount Panorama with the $200,000 millionaires' toys, like he does on the $100,000 yachts in Sydney Harbour, like he does being a grease monkey on a $400,000 Ferrari or a $500,000 Lamborghini Miura. These are his interests. They are not him going out meeting people, are not people who are out there as ordinary people who are affected by the ebb and flow of the economy, who live on the economy for its prosperity and need the public sector for its support. They're not the people he listens to. He listens to the comfortable, the well-off, the smug, the people who have done well enough. He thinks they're the people who he identifies with. They're the people he wants to be part of. Mr Speaker, I reject the Leader of the Opposition's censure. In his first remark he said the government had knowingly and willingly inflicted hardship, when he knows everything the government's doing is about changing that hardship. Everything we're doing. So, Mr Speaker, I move that all words after that be deleted and the following words be inserted. That the House censures the Opposition Leader for advocating policies which would contract fiscal policy, remove unemployment benefits after 9 months, impose a 15% goods and services tax, and introduced a confrontationist industrial relations policy, all of which would retard economic growth and result in a more severe level of unemployment. Now, Mr Speaker, that is the appropriate position of the House. The fact is the opposition doesn't have policies that will help a recovery, they'll only hinder a recovery. Their policies are not the policies for Australia right now. That may be becoming apparent to them, and if that's the case, it explains some of the dismal reception his party gave the Leader of the Opposition when he made that speech I said at the start, without flair nor substance. A speech where he rambled through basically a set of remarks he felt compelled to make, but none of which he believed. We reject the censure out of hand.
Order. The Honourable Prime Minister's time has expired. I'll need to look at the substance of the motion.